The first time Sandra Bullock walked onto the film set, the air seemed to pause. Cameras stood ready, crew members whispered with excitement, and lights glowed against the polished floor. Everyone knew this project was special, not just because it brought two great actors together again, but because people had always felt there was something rare, something almost magical when Sandra and Keanu shared the screen. As she stepped in, she carried a soft smile. But behind that smile was a quiet storm. She had faced weeks of self-doubt before signing this film. She had questioned if she still had the strength to open herself up on screen again, to allow her heart to be so visible. Hollywood can be harsh, and even legends like Sandra sometimes feel small when the world's eyes watch every move. Keanu entered a few minutes later. He was not loud, not dramatic. His presence was calm, steady, almost protective. He noticed Sandra at once. His eyes softened in the way only someone who truly cares can soften. Without saying a word, he walked toward her, steady and sure, and the crew's chatter faded into silence. Within the first 5 minutes, an unspoken tension filled the room. The director looked on, sensing that this connection was more than acting. The crew leaned closer, feeling they were about to witness something rare. Keanu stopped near Sandra and gave a small nod. "It's been a while," he said, his voice quiet but warm. Her eyes glistened for a second. She whispered back, "Yes, it has." What no one knew was that Sandra had been going through a difficult season in her personal life. She had carried loss, sleepless nights, and endless pressure. Her strength in public was admired, but privately, she often felt like she was falling apart. Stepping onto this set was not just about a film. It was about proving to herself she could still stand tall. Keanu seemed to understand without her telling him. In his own way, he had carried his share of heavy shadows, too. That was the quiet bond between them. Both had walked through storms the world rarely saw, and both had learned that kindness and respect matter more than fame. As rehearsals began, Sandra struggled with one of the first emotional scenes. The lines felt heavy, her breathing uneven. The room grew tense as the director waited. Sandra's eyes lowered, and for a moment it looked like she might break. Then Keanu stepped forward. He didn't ask permission, didn't try to take over. He just placed his chair beside hers, leaned a little closer, and said softly, "Take your time. I'm here." That small sentence shook the room. The crew exchanged glances, moved by the care in his voice. Sandra lifted her eyes toward him, and in that instant, she felt safe. Not judged, not pressured, just safe. With his quiet presence, she managed to continue. Her voice steadied, her emotion poured out, and the scene suddenly transformed into something breathtaking. The director raised his hand slowly, signaling to keep rolling. The cameras captured more than acting that day. They captured truth. After the scene ended, the studio stayed silent. Then, one by one, the crew broke into quiet applause. It wasn't scripted. It wasn't planned. It was raw respect for what they had just witnessed. What stunned them even more was how Keanu stayed humble. He didn't take credit. He didn't even stand in the spotlight. He simply gave Sandra a small smile, as if to say, "You did this, not me." Later that night, Sandra sat alone in her trailer, staring at her reflection. She whispered to herself, "I almost gave up before this film, but maybe this is where I'm supposed to be." Her heart was heavy but calmer, because she knew someone truly cared. The beginning of this project was not only the start of a film. It was the start of a journey where respect, humility, and kindness would shine brighter than fame, and none of them knew yet that what unfolded here would change not only the movie, but their lives. The next morning on set, the atmosphere was different. Word had spread across the crew about what had happened the day before. Whispers carried from one corner to another, the way Keanu had stepped in, the way Sandra had held herself together, the way the room had felt as if time stopped. It was all anyone could talk about. The director arrived early, determined to capture that same raw energy again. But deep inside, he feared it might not happen twice. Sometimes moments like those are once in a lifetime. Sometimes magic does not return on command. As Sandra walked onto the set, she noticed the eyes on her. She was no stranger to attention, but this was different. It was not the gaze of fans expecting glamour. It was the silent expectation of a crew waiting to see if lightning could strike again. Her steps felt heavier under that weight. Then, unexpectedly, the set lights flickered for a second, and the sound of heavy equipment shifting startled her. She froze in place, her heart racing. She had never liked sudden noises, and in that instant she was reminded of a personal memory she rarely shared, a memory of loss tied to a loud crash long ago. Her hand trembled slightly as she tried to steady herself. Keanu, standing nearby, saw it instantly. Most people might have missed it, but not him. He walked over without hesitation, shielding her from the harsh glare of the lights. He leaned down slightly and whispered, "Breathe. You're okay. Just breathe." That quiet reminder was enough. Sandra closed her eyes, took a slow breath, and let it out. She opened them again, steadier now. She whispered back, "Thank you." The cameras hadn't started rolling yet, but the crew noticed everything. Once again, they were stunned by the gentleness of Keanu's care. In an industry where egos often filled the room louder than the sound equipment, here was a man who chose silence, who chose presence, who chose kindness. The rehearsal began. Today's scene was heavier than yesterday's. Sandra's character had to confront betrayal. She had to cry, break down, and then rise again. The script was written with sharp lines, but Sandra decided to play it with softness, almost whispering, her pain. Yet halfway through, her voice caught. Tears blurred her vision, not because of acting, but because the words reminded her of real wounds. The set went still. The director opened his mouth to stop the scene, but Keanu raised his hand gently, asking for silence. Instead of staying in his mark, Keanu moved closer to her in the scene, though it wasn't written that way. He looked at her character as if he truly understood every hidden scar behind her eyes. He said the lines slowly, with a tone no one expected. "You don't have to fight this alone." Those words weren't even in the script. They were Keanu's own. But they fit so perfectly that the crew forgot it wasn't written. Sandra looked at him, stunned, and in that moment her real emotions merged with her character's. The tears flowed, the pain felt alive, and the cameras caught it all. When the director finally called cut, the silence in the studio was deafening. No one clapped this time. No one even moved. They just stood in awe of what they had seen. It was not performance anymore. It was life poured onto film. After a long pause, the director finally spoke, his voice shaking slightly. That was the scene. I don't know what you two did, but that's going in the final cut." Sandra wiped her face, still shaken. She whispered to Keanu, "You changed the line." He smiled softly. Sometimes truth needs no script. Later, during lunch break, Sandra sat at a corner table replaying the moment in her mind. She wondered how he knew exactly what to say, how he knew when to step in without making her feel weak. She realized it wasn't luck. It was empathy, the kind that comes only from someone who has walked through his own pain. The crew began to whisper new things now. They said Keanu had become more than a co-star. He had become a shield for her. They said Sandra seemed lighter when he was near, as if a burden had been quietly lifted. And as rumors travel fast in Hollywood, soon even people outside the set began to talk about the unusual connection between them. But not everyone was happy about it. There were voices behind closed doors, executives who worried the growing attention might distract from the film. Some believed too much focus on their bond could overshadow the story itself. Others feared it might invite unwanted gossip. Sandra overheard two crew members talking about it one evening, and the words stung. "They're too close," one whispered. "This isn't about a love story off-screen, it's about the movie. If they're not careful, it'll all fall apart." That night, Sandra sat alone again, the weight of doubt returning. But as she looked out the trailer window, she saw Keanu sitting quietly on the steps of his own trailer, his head tilted back, gazing at the stars as if searching for peace. For some reason, just knowing he was near made her breathe easier. The story was only beginning, and already storms were forming. Storms from outside whispers, storms from personal battles, storms that no one yet knew would test both of them in ways they never imagined. The following week arrived with an energy no one could ignore. The set was busier, the schedule tighter, and the pressure heavier. Executives visited more often, their eyes sharp and restless, as if searching for flaws. They wanted perfection, and they wanted it fast, but beneath the surface, something else stirred. Everyone could sense that the film was no longer just a film. It was becoming something personal, something fragile, something bigger than any of them had expected. On the third day of shooting, the crew prepared for one of the most difficult sequences, a late-night scene where Sandra's character breaks down in the rain. The special effects team built tall rigs to release water. The lights were adjusted to shimmer against falling droplets, and the ground was layered with reflective sheets to catch every gleam. As Sandra stood ready, she felt the cold spray hit her skin. The script demanded she scream, collapse, and release all her bottled pain. She rehearsed the lines over and over, but when the director called action, something inside her froze. The rain poured harder, her breath caught, and instead of acting, real memories came flooding back. Memories of lonely nights when she had cried without anyone knowing. Memories of heartbreak that had carved deep into her soul. The director shouted, "Cut! Reset!" But Sandra shook her head, gripping her chest as if trying to calm her racing heart. Keanu saw it immediately. Before anyone else could move, he stepped into the rain, though he wasn't supposed to be in this part of the scene yet. His clothes grew heavy with water, but he didn't care. He walked straight to her, his eyes steady, and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Look at me," he said softly through the downpour. Her eyes lifted to his, trembling, desperate. "You're not alone in this. Feel it, but don't let it drown you." It wasn't scripted. It wasn't planned. But the cameras kept rolling, and the crew, though confused, did not stop. Keanu's voice carried something real, something the rain couldn't wash away. Sandra drew in a shaking breath and, for the first time, screamed from the deepest part of her chest. Her voice cracked, raw and unfiltered, and the rain turned the moment into something cinematic beyond imagination. The director didn't dare interrupt. He whispered to the cameraman, "Keep filming. Don't miss a second." When Sandra finally collapsed to the ground, Keanu knelt beside her, holding her steady as her tears mixed with the rain. The shot ended not with a cut, but with silence so thick that even the sound of falling water felt distant. When the director finally called it, the crew erupted in applause. Some even wiped their eyes. They had just witnessed a moment that no script could create, a moment born from real pain and real care. But after the applause faded, so did the light in Sandra's expression. She left the set quietly, retreating, to her trailer without a word. She didn't want anyone to see how shaken she was. The line between acting and reality had blurred so much that it scared her. Later that evening, Keanu knocked on her trailer door. She hesitated, then let him in. He didn't bring flowers, or food, or any grand gesture. He simply brought silence, the kind that doesn't pressure, the kind that allows someone to breathe. He sat across from her, waiting until she finally spoke. "It's too real," she whispered. I don't know if I can keep doing this. Keanu leaned forward, his eyes calm. You can, because you're not carrying it alone. Sometimes the pain we think is too much becomes the thing that saves us when we share it. Those words pierced through her walls. She lowered her head, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. And for the first time in weeks, she let herself cry without holding back. Keanu didn't move closer. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough. The next day, the crew noticed something different in Sandra. She was still emotional, still fragile, but there was a quiet strength returning. She held her head higher, her lines carried more power, and when she stood beside Keanu, the screen seemed to glow with authenticity. Yet not everyone was celebrating. Behind closed doors, the executives argued. One of them slammed a script on the table saying, "This is too raw, too messy. We need control, not chaos. They're turning this into something we didn't plan." Another replied, "Yes, but look at the footage. It's electric. You can't buy chemistry like this." Meanwhile, the gossip outside the set grew louder. Tabloids whispered about what was happening between Sandra and Keanu. Some painted it as romance, others as distraction. Sandra saw the headlines late one night and her stomach tightened. She hated that people couldn't understand the difference between care and scandal. She feared the noise would destroy everything they were building. But what she didn't know was that Keanu had already made a quiet decision. No matter what, the world said he would not let her stand alone against it. The tension was growing. Whispers in the studio, flashes from paparazzi waiting outside the lot, doubts from executives, and storms inside Sandra's own heart. And though no one realized it yet, the greatest test was just ahead. A moment when kindness itself would be questioned, and when both of them would have to decide whether to keep walking through the storm together or retreat back into silence. The storm outside the set grew louder than anyone expected. It was no longer just about acting or about a film being made. It had become about whispers, flashing cameras, and the heavy weight of public judgment. Paparazzi camped near the studio gates, waiting to catch even a glimpse of Sandra and Keanu together. The crew, once united in admiration, began to split into quiet groups. Some were amazed by the rawness they had seen between the two actors, while others worried it would swallow the film in rumors. One morning, as Sandra arrived on set, cameras outside flashed in a frenzy. Questions were shouted at her. Questions about her and Keanu, about whether the closeness was real or an act. She lowered her head, slipping quickly inside, but her heart raced with unease. She had dealt with media attention her entire career, but this felt different. This time it wasn't about her alone. It was about the bond she shared with someone she deeply respected. Inside, Keanu was already waiting. He saw the tension in her shoulders, the way she pressed her lips tightly together. Without asking, he walked beside her, matching her pace. He didn't speak right away. He simply let his presence cover the noise until they reached the quiet of the set. Then softly he said, "Don't let their noise rewrite your truth." Her eyes softened. But the noise feels louder than the truth sometimes. That line lingered in the air, heavy and painful. The day's schedule called for one of the most critical scenes of the film, a confrontation between their characters filled with anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. The script demanded raised voices, raw fury, and painful honesty. The director gathered everyone and reminded them, "This scene will define the film. It has to feel real." As the cameras rolled, Sandra poured every ounce of frustration she carried, both as her character and as herself, into the scene. She shouted words that cut sharp, tears spilling with anger. Keanu responded with steady fire, his voice low but powerful, his eyes burning with restrained pain. The scene escalated until it no longer felt like fiction. It felt like two souls clashing, exposing wounds no one else could see. When the director finally called cut, the crew erupted in hushed awe. But Sandra's hands shook as she stepped away. She realized the line between acting and reality had blurred again, this time in anger. She worried the intensity might leave scars. She retreated, quickly to her trailer, locking the door. Keanu hesitated outside, unsure if he should follow. He didn't want to invade her space, but he also couldn't ignore the weight of what had just unfolded. Finally, after several minutes, he knocked gently. "Sandra," he said quietly. "It's me. May I come in?" She stayed silent for a moment, then whispered, "Yes." Inside, she sat with her face in her hands. When she looked up, her eyes were red, not just from the scene, but from something deeper. "It's too much," she admitted. "I feel like I'm carrying not only my own emotions, but the world's judgment too. I don't know how long I can keep this up." Keanu sat across from her, his voice steady. "You don't have to carry it alone, but you do have to carry it with honesty. People can say what they want. They can write headlines, start rumors, twist things, but truth has a way of surviving noise. And your truth is stronger than their voices." Those words settled deep into her heart. But while Sandra was finding strength in his support, the storm outside only grew fiercer. That evening, tabloids released photos of the rain scene, painting it as a secret romantic confession. The headlines were brutal, accusing them of using the film to cover up personal feelings. When Sandra saw the headlines the next morning, her hands trembled. "They'll ruin everything," she whispered to herself. She feared the executives might pull her from the project, or worse, shut down the film entirely. The rumors were spreading too fast, too far. Yet when she arrived on set, something unexpected happened. The crew, instead of judging, rallied around her. One assistant whispered, "Ignore them, Sandra. We saw the truth here. It wasn't scandal, it was art." Another nodded, saying, "Don't let outsiders tell the story of what we lived through on this set." Their quiet support gave her strength. Still, the tension reached its peak later that week when the executives called an emergency meeting with the director. They questioned the risks, the unwanted attention, and whether the film should continue. Voices rose in the boardroom, echoing with doubt. But the director, who had watched Keanu and Sandra create moments no script could buy, stood firm. "If you stop this film," he told them, "you're not stopping a scandal, you're destroying a masterpiece in the making." The room fell, silent. For now, the film was safe. But the warning was clear. One more spark could burn everything down. And so, as the next scene approached, a tender, emotional sequence where their characters would share a rare moment of peace, the crew knew they were not just filming a story. They were walking a tightrope between creation and collapse. In that fragile balance, every glance, every line, every breath carried weight. And none of them knew that the most unexpected twist was still waiting, a twist that would challenge not only the film, but the bond between Sandra and Keanu themselves. The morning of the next big shoot began with a strange stillness. The studio lot was unusually quiet, though everyone knew the silence was fragile, like glass ready to crack. Sandra felt it the moment she stepped out of her car, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. Crew members moved faster than usual, whispering instead of speaking aloud, and their eyes often darted toward the gates where paparazzi still gathered in restless packs. Inside, the director gathered the cast and crew. Today's scene was meant to be gentle, a rare moment of peace between their characters after endless conflict. The set was designed like a warm living room, lit softly, with shadows of candlelight dancing across the walls. The script described a long conversation, quiet laughter, and a pause filled with unspoken love. But tension crept in even before the cameras rolled. During rehearsals, one crew member suddenly pulled Sandra aside. His face was pale, his voice urgent. "Be careful, today," he whispered. "There are people here who don't want this film to finish." Before she could ask what he meant, he slipped away, disappearing back into the crowd. Sandra's stomach tightened. She had no idea whether to believe him, but unease pressed heavier on her chest. The scene began anyway. Keanu entered first, his movements steady, his expression calm. Sandra followed, her lines soft, her smile tender. For a moment, the set glowed with authenticity, their chemistry pulling everyone into silence. Then, just as Sandra delivered her most delicate line, a sudden crash echoed from the back of the studio. The door burst open, and flashes of light exploded into the room. Paparazzi had broken past security, shoving cameras forward, shouting questions in a frenzy. The crew panicked, rushing to block them, but the damage was already done. Sandra froze, mid-sentence, her eyes wide, her chest heaving with shock. The sacred silence of the scene had been shattered by chaos. Keanu reacted instantly. Without hesitation, he moved in front of her, shielding her from the blinding flashes. He didn't push or shout. He simply raised his hand calmly, his voice firm yet respectful. "Enough," he said. His tone carried such gravity that even the intruders paused. Security swarmed quickly after, pulling the photographers out, but the wound had already been struck. The crew looked shaken, the director furious, and Sandra stood trembling in the middle of the set, unable to steady her breath. Keanu turned to her, his voice softer now. "Breathe. Look at me. Nothing can touch you here." She wanted to believe him, but tears welled up. "This isn't just about us anymore," she whispered. "They'll twist it. They'll destroy it." The crew fell into silence, unsure of what to say. Later that evening, the director called a private meeting. Inside, the mood was heavy. One of the producers slammed his fist on the table. "This is what happens when rumors spread too far. We've lost control of the narrative." Another producer added, "If this continues, the studio will pull the plug. It's not about the art anymore. It's about survival." Sandra sat quietly in the corner, her hands clenched, her mind racing. She thought about walking away, ending it before everything collapsed. She whispered, almost to herself, "Maybe I should quit." Keanu's eyes turned sharply toward her. "Don't say that," he said firmly. "You don't quit when the storm is loud. You stand taller so the storm knows you won't break." His words shook her, but more than his words, it was the way. He looked at her, with belief so strong it felt unshakable. For the first time, she realized that while she feared the outside world, she trusted Keanu completely. His presence was her anchor in a sea of chaos. The next day, against all odds, they returned to set. The director insisted they reshoot the interrupted scene, but something extraordinary happened. Instead of tension, the disruption seemed to fuel them. When Sandra and Keanu sat across from each other, their eyes locked. The pain of the chaos transformed into the most powerful performance yet. Sandra's voice trembled as she delivered her line, but this time it wasn't weakness. It was truth. Keanu's reply carried not just his character's feelings, but his own unspoken promise of protection. The crew watched in stunned silence, knowing they were witnessing something that no scandal, no paparazzi, no rumor could destroy. When the director whispered, "Cut," he didn't shout. He didn't even move. He just whispered again, "This is history." Still, the threat hadn't disappeared. Sandra later discovered that someone inside the crew had leaked details to the press. Betrayal had slipped into their circle, and no one knew who to trust anymore. The weight of it pressed heavier than ever. Yet through it all, Sandra felt a quiet shift in her heart. The more the world tried to break her, the more she leaned into Keanu's quiet strength. And the more she leaned into him, the more she realized that what they were creating wasn't just a film. It was a lesson in resilience, respect, and unshakable kindness. The morning after the chaos, the set carried an air of unease. It wasn't just the memory of paparazzi breaking in or the noise of tabloids outside. It was something deeper. People whispered quietly in corners, their eyes shifting nervously. Trust had been broken. Someone from within had fed the storm. Sandra felt it in her bones. The betrayal hurt more than the cameras ever could. It meant that someone she worked beside, someone who watched her bare her soul on set, had chosen gossip over loyalty. Her heart ached with the thought. The director called a private meeting with key crew members, demanding answers. "Someone here has been leaking information," he said, his voice sharp with frustration. "If this continues, the film dies. We cannot survive another storm." For a long moment, the room stayed silent. Then one of the assistants, a young man with trembling hands, stood slowly. His eyes filled with regret as he whispered, "It was me." Gasps filled the room. He looked directly at Sandra, his voice shaking. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was pressured, offered money, promised opportunities. I thought it wouldn't hurt anyone. But I was wrong. I betrayed." "All of you!" The director's face tightened with fury. Crew members whispered angrily. Some wanted him thrown out immediately. But before anyone could move, Keanu spoke. His voice was calm, steady. He told the truth now. That takes courage. We don't heal betrayal with more anger. We heal it with honesty. Let the studio handle the punishment. But here, let us move forward. The crew fell silent. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely. But Keanu's words stopped the fire from burning further. Sandra, though still hurt, found herself watching Keanu closely. She realized this was what made him different. He didn't carry hate. He chose respect, even in moments of pain. With the betrayal revealed, the set slowly regained its focus. But the weight of the scandal had left scars. Executives threatened, once more to cancel, demanding the director wrap filming quickly. They warned, "One more mistake, and this is over." The final week of shooting began under enormous pressure. The last scene of the film was scheduled, a powerful ending where Sandra's character would finally find peace, standing beside Keanu's character in a quiet, glowing silence. As they prepared, Sandra felt fear creeping in again. Her voice trembled as she whispered to Keanu backstage, "What if I can't hold it together? What if I fail this ending?" Keanu turned to her, his expression soft yet unshakable. "Then I will stand with you, and together we won't fail." Those words became her anchor. The cameras rolled one final time. The set was simple, a soft glow of sunset through tall windows, dust in the air catching the light like gold. Sandra stepped into frame, her face carrying every wound, every scar, every ounce of resilience. Keanu followed, his presence steady, his eyes filled with quiet strength. They didn't rush their lines. They let silence carry the weight. Sandra's character spoke softly about survival, about finding light after storms. Keanu's reply was not loud, not dramatic. It was tender, almost a whisper. Sometimes the light we search for is not out there. Sometimes it stands beside us. Tears slipped down Sandra's face. They weren't scripted. They were real. She looked at him, and for a moment it felt like the world outside, the gossip, the betrayal, the storms, had all disappeared. All that remained was truth. The director, unable to stop himself, let the cameras linger long after the lines ended. The silence itself told the story. When he finally whispered, "Cut," the studio stayed frozen. Then, slowly, the crew began to clap. It wasn't forced. It wasn't polite. It was raw, from the heart. They knew they had captured something unforgettable. The film wrapped that night. There was no grand party, no loud celebration. Instead, there was a quiet gathering, a few raised glasses, and a deep sense that they had created something rare. Outside, the noise of tabloids continued, but inside, those who had been there carried a different memory. Not of scandal, but of resilience, respect, and kindness. Sandra sat alone for a moment after, reflecting. She thought about the storm she had endured, the doubts she had carried, the betrayal that had cut so deep. And then she thought of Keanu, his calm strength, his quiet care, his belief in her when she had nearly given up. She whispered softly to herself, "He didn't just save the film. He saved me." Keanu, passing by, overheard her words. He didn't stop, didn't draw attention. He just gave her a small nod, a gentle smile, and walked on. The story ended not with scandal, not with defeat, but with something far greater. Two souls proving that in a world full of noise, kindness can still silence the storm.